Welcome everybody to this briefing session on the new Agile Sprint call that was launched at the start of September. So my name is Rachel Hayman and I am the Programme Manager for the Agile Initiative. I will just let my colleague Pete introduce himself as well.
Hi everyone, great to see so many of you on the call. I'm Pete Barbrook-Johnson. I'm a lecturer over in Geography Department and the Deputy Director for the Agile Initiative.
Okay, so also on the call we've got Heather Stallard, who is the Agile Communications and Events Officer, and Alison de Vries, who is the Agile Sprint Coordinator, so helping us out today. So yeah, delighted to have so many people here. What we're going to do is I'm going to give a little sort of brief overview of the Agile Initiative to make sure that people sort of understand the broader programme into which this call sits. And then Pete will take over and provide a bit of a briefing on the actual call that we've got open at the moment and the parameters. And then there will be time for you to ask any questions that you have on the call. Please also use the chat if you want to ask questions as well. And we are recording this session so that we can also share the recording with people who are unable to participate today, but who might have questions about the call at the moment. Okay, so yeah, just to briefly introduce the Agile Initiative. So we're based out of the Oxford Martin School Social Sciences Division. The Agile Initiative was started in February 2022 and is a 5-year NERC funded programme under the umbrella of a NERC initiative called the Changing the Environment programme. So Agile is halfway through its journey at the moment. And we have, as you can see on the screen, we've got a programme team and a management group who oversee the initiative, who, with our management group sort of stemming from a number of different departments within the university, and we have an engine room core team who support the initiative and make sure that everything happens smoothly as we go along. So what's Agile all about? Essentially, Agile was set up to respond to a challenge that researchers at Oxford University felt was very prevalent in the environmental sciences, namely that if we are really going to tackle some of the catastrophic environmental degradation that we're seeing on a global scale, then we need science and policy to be working together in a different way. Both science and policy are required, but we really need to be thinking differently about how this intersection works. We need to act now if we're going to address biodiversity loss, climate change and poverty, and really tackle some of these big challenges that we're seeing at the moment. We know that policy makers require rapid responses in a timely way to these sorts of problems, but research often works at a different time scale. And researchers are often working within disciplinary silos as well. So what we're really identifying as the challenge is that we've really got to think differently about how policymakers and researchers are working together at different speeds and in different ways in order to bring, produce the science that is necessary to tackle the challenges that we are facing. So our solution, the solution that the Agile Initiative has put forward, is that we are seeking to develop a new model of how academic institutions work with decision makers to identify and respond to pressing environmental science research questions rapidly and effectively, and mobilizing interdisciplinary teams in order to do that. Agile is quite an experimental program. And we are constantly, as we go through this program, iterating with the way in which we are working and the way in which we are organizing the research that we support. So we've got 3 main aspects to our work. The first of which is these research project sprints that we are funding. As part of our award from NERC, we have a flexible fund which we are using to allocate to research projects that we think have the potential to produce a scientific response to a critical policy relevant question in a very timely manner. So the first pillar of our work is around delivering solutions to problems. And very central to this is the idea that these are co-created research projects, co-created with the decision makers who are going to actually use the research subsequently. And those decision makers could be within the UK government, they could be more global actors, they could be policymakers at local or regional levels, or within, within other parts of the UK, so the Scottish government, Northern Ireland, Wales, or they could be with private sector actors or with non-governmental actors as well. So we sort of think about policy in quite a broad way. So that's the kind of sprint idea. The second part of our work is about creating a cohort of interdisciplinary researchers who actually have the skills, the interest, and the desire to do research in a different sort of way, to work at this interdisciplinary intersection with policymakers. And throughout the programme, anybody who's involved in an Agile sprint will also be part of this cohort building activities that we are doing in order to ensure that we are developing that capability at Oxford University to do research faster and more effectively in response to decision maker needs. And so the final element of this is sort of recognizing that this is not normal and it's not easy to do, particularly in an institution like Oxford. I mean, Oxford does great interdisciplinary research in the environmental sciences, but we're constantly facing challenges in the way in which we're set up as an institution, in the incentive structures that are in place for researchers, particularly early career researchers as well. So we're very keen as we go through the programme to learn about what needs to change within the institution in order to enable this type of research to happen more effectively going forward. So that's the sort of research culture dimension to the Agile initiative. So so far, we're halfway through the programme now. So far, we have funded 11 sprint projects, which you can find out about on the website. And I'd really encourage anybody thinking of applying to do a sprint to have a good look at those sprints so that you can see the sorts of research that we're doing, the way in which it's set up, and the sort of pathways towards impact that we're looking for in a very tight time frame. So we've got 6 projects that have already completed. We've got 2 that 6 completed. We've got 2 that are close to completion. The one on can we solve the spin-up problem in Earth system modelling, and how can we manage uncertainties in habitat greenhouse gas emissions. Those will be coming to an end in the next weeks and couple of months. And then we've got 2 new ones that have, 3 new ones that have just started or in the early stages. So the sprints on is nature a policy solution to mental health in schools? Can regenerative agriculture deliver on a regenerative food system? And how can the UK implement the finance-related goals of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework? So yeah, 5 underway at the moment, and this new call is very much about getting the next set of sprints up and running as soon as we possibly can. As you will see, all of these sprints are set up with a question, and that's a really important part of it. What is the question that you're trying to answer with the research? So I'm going to hand over to Pete to explain a bit about the specifics of this sprint call.
Thank you, Rachel. And yeah, hopefully people found it quite helpful to see the spread of different sprints, the different topics they come from. So this specific call, which went live a few weeks ago and is open until November, I'm just going to give a few more concrete details about that, and then we'll open up to questions. I'm sure people have lots of specific questions, but I will try and head off some of the most obvious ones or ones that pop up. So often people, and we need to be clear ourselves what we mean by a sprint. So sprints are these very, very focused research projects. They might produce traditional research outputs. You'll probably write some papers, but you'll also produce non-traditional outputs. We might think of a policy brief as an obvious thing, but I think we should go much further than just writing policy briefs at the end of a sprint. Sprints are really focused on a specific policy impact. There's a very clear relationship of how the research is going to be used in the policy process. They are co-created with partners, and we really mean it when we say co-creation. We don't just mean a couple of chats now and then. We mean a deep partnership and collaboration with some non-academic partners. They should be interdisciplinary. Again, that can mean different things, but I think we want to see at least two, if not more, disciplines represented in the team and the questions that are being explored. In terms of numbers, it tends to be somewhere between 2 and 8 people involved, although it's hard to be precise about what's the right size team. I think that varies a lot. There is a very clear answer there on how long, and the sprint we do put a hard stop on 12 months, and we don't want projects that are 2 or 3 years long. It's fine to be shorter than 12 months though. If something was 3 or 6 or 9 months, I think that could be perfectly fine as well. But obviously people tend to fall around the 12-month as that's the max we give. In terms of who can apply and who can lead a sprint, basically anyone who's at Oxford on a departmental or faculty contract at grade 7 or above. So this is this kind of research associate or above. So it's not students, not people with only a college role. But if you're on a research role in the university through your department, you should be fine to lead a project. We do ask for a commitment of 20% time. So that's to ensure that the leadership of the sprint is properly invested in. We aren't seeing people on very small percentages of time leading. We can have people external to Oxford funded on sprints. That's totally fine. We just do need an Oxford lead, basically, but we can have external partners funded. In terms of how you apply as a team, as an individual, there's kind of two main ways we see that's worked well in the past. Where we have a team with a named lead and an identified team already in place. That's great, that's fine. Of course, that's not always possible. So it might be that you propose something where you say, I want to hire people, or I'm going to identify people in due course. And so you kind of apply as a lead without a named team. But I think you do have to be careful to be realistic about how you're going to get that team in place quickly. We know hiring people can take some time, so you need to sort of build that into your thinking. I'll say a bit more in a moment about open track and defined track, but that's a key new feature of this call. Is there is this defined track and open track, kind of two ways to propose your topics. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. And then the other thing to make clear that's not always obvious is there is this kind of two-stage process where there's this first, what we call expression of interest, where you write a proposal that's actually quite short, not that time consuming to write. I think there's a lot of thinking goes into it. And then it's those expressions of interest that we have a panel, we assess those, and then we take forward a subset to a full co-creation process where you then have a deeper thinking, revise the ideas, update the ideas, and write a more traditional kind of slightly bigger, still not that long, but a bigger proposal with a proper costings. And for this call, that deeper process of co-creation and writing up a full proposal would happen in the new year. In terms of budget, it's right there in front of you in black and white, but somewhere between 150,000 and 400,000. That's at 80% FEC. If we have detailed questions on budget, I'm hoping Rachel can illuminate those. But just to give you a sense of if those are completely new to the FEC language, that just means, if you wanted to fund something that's going to actually cost £500,000, Agile will give you £400,000 towards that. In this call, we have a budget around about £2 million, so pretty healthy budget. I think we're quite keen to spend as much of that as we can. We don't want to hold money back right to the end of this current phase of Agile. So that gives you a sense of how many sprints we might fund. We might fund 4 or 5 quite large ones, or we might fund more smaller ones. And that kind of landscape, or that kind of constellation of different sprints, really depends on what we get in terms of the size of proposals people put to us. And yeah, there's the deadline for getting in your expressions of interest, midnight on that Friday, the 22nd of November. Next slide, please. So just a few words on these two tracks, because this is slightly different to how we've done it before. The defined track is where there's already a set of 4 topics that we have identified with external organizations, and we would like researchers to respond to those. And I'll list those to you in a moment. But these are existing topics that we've put together. They're described in 1 or 2 pages in the call documents. And we would like you to propose something about a sprint to address those topics. And you're welcome to kind of try and engage with those in a critical way. It's not that we just need to take those topics and the way those questions have been expressed as kind of read and it just completely accept those and do something. I think if you feel like, oh, I'd like to ask that question in a different way, or I'd like to bring in an extra set of questions or extra set of perspectives, or I'd like to focus just on this bit and not this long list of questions, that's fine. I think it's fine to respond to those topics in a kind of creative, critical way while still thinking these are the questions that partner had. I don't want to just throw them out completely and say they're all rubbish. So that's the defined track, responding to these existing questions. Then the open track is the much more familiar mode where you propose your own topic. You've probably, I mean, you should have your own partners already identified that you want to work with. Maybe that's from a long-term relationship you've already had or something newer, but you suggest a topic, you make clear who are those partners. Next slide, please. So here are those 4 topics. We can maybe, if people have questions about them, we can go into them. I don't want to dwell on the details too much, but just to give you a sense of what's in there, in case this suddenly sparks an idea you hadn't realized, or you can pass this to colleagues working on these types of topics. We have one from Google, who are very interested in the energy impacts of AI, and particularly the indirect energy impacts in different sectors if AI is adopted at large in those sectors. So, what does AI mean for the emissions and energy use of transport, for example, or the energy sector? Then we have a topic from WWF, very much focused on food, from their food team, trying to think of, as a typo there in the name, it's thinking about dietary change as a lever to achieve tipping points in the Amazon and Cerrado. Then we have a topic from Arup, who are thinking very UK focused. They're really interested in understanding the health of our rivers, and they think it would be really helpful to have a baseline river survey. And then there's a topic from Natural Resources Wales, thinking about how we do better localized decision making, and particularly how we take some of the policy that the Welsh government receives and the context they receive from the UK, and thinking about what that means at a more local level. So if any of those sound like they might be of interest, definitely go and have a read of the topics that are in the call, because there's 1 or 2 pages describing those, not just a sentence. Next slide, please. So yeah, there's the timeline. The call is live now. It's out already. You can go and download the pack or ask to be sent the pack. The deadline is that 22nd. That's a firm deadline. There are not going to be extensions into the weekend. That's not really fair to sort of ask, oh, can I send it to you at midnight on Sunday? Lots of people can't work over the weekend. So that's a firm deadline on that Friday. Into early December, we will very quickly assemble a panel and make decisions on these expressions of interest, and so be able to tell you whether you're being invited to the next stage. We really hope before Christmas, and then in the new year, when we move forward to this second stage of developing full proposals and doing the costings, etc. And then there will be another layer of kind of assessing these full proposals, and that's kind of done on a rolling basis in the new year as they come. We don't force you you must write your proposal by this date. I think you submit it that second stage when it's ready, but ideally sort of somewhere between February and April. And then in late spring, early summer is when these sprints would start, 2025, and lasting up to a year. Next slide, please.
So the next slide is actually some frequently asked questions, Pete. So I think we'll just open it up and I'll share these if people don't.
Yeah, sure. We get these are the ones that we get most often. But I think let's open up for questions. We've got now plenty of time to take questions. I think put your hands up, put questions in the chat. I think they are very much interested in the positive impacts. I think we know that there are very serious negative impacts, direct impacts of these technologies, right? And so I think they know that, and there's a lot of research happening on direct impacts, and they're involved in that. But I think this is slightly more thinking about what's those indirect impacts that might be more positive. What happens if the transport sector adopts AI at large? And as you said, as you kind of hint at with your circular economy example, that sector becomes more optimized or more efficient in some way. What might be those more positive impacts? So Google definitely come at it as they want to see some good stories. They want some good news here rather than just the bad news of the direct. So I think it's the more positive. But of course, we need to engage with it neutrally, so we don't just take their lead for good news. But that's definitely what they're thinking about. Absolutely. That's why that's why Google and Arup are on that list there in front of us. Like absolutely businesses, private sector can be the policy partner, and as can NGOs, as can public sector. I think in the past we've had a lot of public sector focused sprints. I think that's quite natural that Agile finds ourselves in that space. We're keen to do more with NGOs and the private sector. I think, and there's a lot of opportunities there. I think the challenge is with the private sector, making sure we're not being kind of co-opted by commercial interests and getting that balance right and clear about why this should be funded by taxpayer money if it's got a private focus question. But I think it's perfectly possible to negotiate that tension, and a similar tension with NGOs. How do we avoid being wrapped up in a kind of lobbying interest group type role? I think we need to be careful with that, but I think it's perfectly possible to do that. But yeah, absolutely, private sector and NGO partners very much encouraged, as are still, as we always were, public sector organizations. If I understood, maybe I'll have a pop at this. I'd be interested to hear Rachel's answer as well. Like my take is, I think we do want new research to happen in the sprint. This is not just a kind of impact acceleration or a translation sort of knowledge exchange program. We do want new research in the sprint, and that's why the sprints are 12 months and pretty well funded by, I mean, I'm a social scientist, so by my standards, they feel pretty well funded. So I think we do want the new research in there, but of course you will be drawing on stuff that's happened before, and of course stuff will happen after. But no, it's not just a kind of impact acceleration or knowledge exchange grant. It is a research grant. Is there anything you'd add to that, Rachel?
Right, it's not seed funding. So we're not funding you for 12 months to develop a bigger research proposal that you would then be applying for and doing the research later on. So it really is, the whole point is that we are trying to deliver research that is required where there is a gap for the research that can be done rapidly. So if your research if you can't deliver a research dimension within 12 months, then it's not a sprint. And most of our policy partners to date, they are looking for new and fresh research. And so what we're trying to ensure that sprint has to define that. It does not mean that there isn't, as Pete says, that there isn't, you may be building on a body of research. You may, this may feed off into further proposals and bigger research ideas, but actually within the sprint time, you have to deliver some research because this is a research grant.
So on the balance between open and defined track, we are very intentionally trying to not take a preference between them and treat them equally. And we'll give our panel, who are making that first set of decisions on the in December, give them that guidance very clearly that they shouldn't prefer one over the other. And so it might be that we do all open track in the end and we don't use any of our defined track, even if we get proposals. We will take them on their face value. How strong is the policy pool? How clear is the interdisciplinarity? What's the track record of the team, etc. I think that said, that we'll try and treat them equally. I think there's two kind of things that are in the mix in there as well. One is, I think there's actually, it feels counterintuitive, but I think there's actually an advantage in a way to open track topics. With the defined track, it feels like, oh, we might favor them because we've come up with them. But actually, you're almost coming at those problems slightly colder. You've heard about them in the call. Maybe you're working on similar things, but then you're responding to something that you've seen in the call. Whereas in the open track, probably you've got longer term relationships that you're building on. And I think you've probably got much warmer, more established relationships. So I think in some ways the open track has some advantage there, even if it feels like the defined track is things we've come up with. So I think that's one thing in the mix. The other piece to make clear is that for the defined track, these topics that have come from other organizations, we will ask those other organizations what they think about the proposal. So if, say, for example, proposals come in on the Google topic, we will ask Google, the teams that we're working with, what they think about it. And if they say, we really, really hate this particular proposal and we really, really love this one, that will be quite a strong steer on our thinking. And we will probably won't take forward one that they say they really dislike, unless we really, really like it and we want to have that conversation and try and bring people together. But so we take quite a strong steer from the partner's opinion of the proposals.
So, I mean, yeah, definitely, as Pete says, we have a set of criteria that constitute a sprint, and that is what will be used in the decision-making process. Although we will be inviting those policy partners to provide an opinion, that opinion will be fed to the panel as well. We have included within the defined track documentation a contact point with the policy partner. We are hesitant on this one because we don't want our policy partners to feel inundated. But if you are interested in pursuing one of those topics, then it would certainly be advisable to get in touch with them and just potentially have that touch-based conversation to see what you're thinking and what they're thinking as well. We are keen. We have these policy partners who are coming to us who are interested in the Agile initiative. So we are keen to engage with that, because these are users of research who are telling us they've got a research need. So it's definitely worth thinking about. But we will be treating every application using the same criteria in the end. So on expectations of PIs. So we are very keen at Agile to encourage early career researchers to become leads on projects. It's a fairly safe space in which to do that. So there will be, there's no, we're not going to be discriminating against early career researchers who come forward as leads, but we also recognise that running a sprint can be quite challenging. You're trying to manage an interdisciplinary team to deliver research very, very rapidly. So where it is a grade 7 sort of early career researcher who's applying as a lead, we would be looking to see quite strong mentorship from senior colleagues in support of that early career researcher. It depends on the complexity of the project, but we really want to make sure that any early career researchers are well supported in this process. They get supported by my team, by the engine room, but we would also expect them to be supported by their departments as well. So they need to have that commitment from the department. But we're really keen to encourage it, and we've got a number of sprints at the moment which have been absolutely, sort of pretty, hopefully, career defining for some of those early career researchers as well. The reason that we say 20% minimum of time for a PI is that sprints are different. So even if you're a very seasoned researcher with a huge amount of experience, our experience, what we have learned so far is that sprints are not the same. They are different. And if as a PI, you're a very senior academic involved in a sprint and just have got your name as a token gesture on the project, and you don't honestly have the time to do it, and what you're just going to do is hire some postdocs to do all the work, that hasn't worked very well to date. So what we really want to see is a commitment from the PI for a minimum of 20% of their time, and we will be looking for that, because it does take some additional effort to get these sprints done in a timely manner. So there's no preference either way. We will be looking at experience, but looking at experience relative to the question, the complexity of the project, the nature of the relationships as well. And we know that we've got some brilliant earlier career researchers in the university who've got a wealth of experience of working with partners, who've got real potential, and we do want to encourage that. But that does mean that we're also very keen to hear from experienced PIs who want to do something different, who haven't done something like this before as well.
Thank you, Rachel. I think it's time to go to the chat. My phone has been going nuts, and I don't think it's WhatsApp. I think it's Teams chat messages coming through. So Alison's going to help try and make a sense of the questions that come through. So yeah, over to you, Alison.
They blossomed quite quickly. So our first question is, can we please get an example of an interdisciplinary project, and are they required to be interdepartmental?
Oh, very good question. Tough question as well. I'll have a quick go, and then I'm very keen to hear Rachel's answer too. So for me, the example is, yes, a very quick and simple way to think, is it interdisciplinary? Are there two departments represented? Of course, that's a simple way. Of course, some departments are very broad and have different dimensions. You know, in the geography department where I'm based, of course, it would make no sense to say that you can't have two disciplines within geography. There are many. So it's not just that there's two departments, it's that there's two or more disciplines represented by those individuals. And so that might be a natural science and a social science, or a natural science and a physical or engineering science represented, or it might be that actually within the natural sciences there's then two disciplines represented. So I think as it's not, I don't think we're prescriptive, but I think we want to see at least in the core disciplines of the people involved, are there two or more represented? That's the kind of the rule of thumb I'd be looking for. What do you reckon, Rachel?
Yes, and it's not that we're wanting false interdisciplinarity. The point of this is that we recognise that in the sorts of the sorts of issues that we are trying to tackle is that, you know, single focused discipline science is not going to be enough to actually come up with a solution that is workable for most policy issues. So generally speaking, most policy partners and decision makers are looking for ways in which the research can look at a question from a number of different points of view. So most of the projects that we've had so far have been interdepart. We've had more than one department involved. We've had different divisions involved as well. But your interdisciplinarity can also come from your external partners. So if you are working with people from another university, you can include partners from another university, or from business, or from NGOs, or from policy. And it could be that your interdisciplinarity actually comes from an external collaborator on the project as well. But the point is that there are very few questions in this field from a policy perspective that can be answered by a single discipline alone. So, and that's what that is where the interdisciplinarity comes in as being so important. So, you know, we've had projects so far which have involved sort of biology and geography, earth sciences and maths, biology, earth sciences and geography. We've got the Department of Psychiatry working with GLAM, but we're also with some geographers in there who happen to be within psychiatry. You know, there's a real mixture going on, and it's very much about what does this question, what do we need to bring together in a team in order to answer this question? And what perspectives do we need to bring into it? And we're really keen to bring in those different perspectives. So really, we would help you to think that through as well during the co-creation phase, if that's something that, you know, as you're developing the proposal further, you can also, you suddenly go, hold on a minute, wouldn't it be really great if we had somebody, you know, from an anthropological perspective in the mix, or somebody with a humanities perspective? And that sort of team refinement also can happen during the co-creation phase, but you need to have a good think about what's it going to take to answer the question.
Thank you. Next question is it possible to delay the start of a sprint if we need to apply for environmental permits? For example, the EA requires 2 to 4 months to review permits.
So my answer on that is, if you get through the expression of interest phase, you then go into this co-creation phase where you're developing the full proposal. Ideally, you are looking, as soon as that full proposal has been accepted, we're looking for you to start as soon as possible, as soon as the admin has been overcome. And that admin could be, you know, so part of that is internal admin, just moving the money around. It could be recruitment, and it could be applying for permits and things like that. So it's always a bit of a balancing act. And it's likewise getting QREC, getting ethical permissions as well. It's a bit of a balancing act, because often you don't want to start that process until you know that you've got the funding, and you're not going to know that you've got the funding until you submit the full proposal and that's gone through a final review process. But we work alongside you in this period, and therefore we will, you know, we try to expedite things as much as possible. And where we can't expedite things, that's also really interesting for us to learn about as well. So, you know, we can delay, but we try and do as much of that thinking and putting all of those things in motion as possible during the co-creation phase, so that we can get things up and running really rapidly. So knowing that you need to do that is something you can already build into your timeline as well.
Great, thank you. The next question is from someone hoping to start closer to the April side of things. How quickly would they need to submit their full application in the new year?
Fast as they can. You know, it's up to you. You know, you need to There are certain things that need to happen during the co-creation phase. We have guidance and support to help you do that. You need to you need to flesh out the ideas. You need to make sure that those ideas are being fleshed out with your partners. And I know that in the new year, that could be a little bit challenging with lots of people on holiday in February. You need to have thought through, do you need to recruit and what have you? You need to get a budget done, but very much my guidance at the moment is on the day that you receive confirmation that you are being invited to co-creation, you let your departmental research facilitators know so that they are able to start providing costings and things like that. So it's really up to you. It's as fast as it can be. If you can get your proposal pulled together and submitted to us within a month, it probably takes us about another month to turn around to go through a final review process and all the admin and things like that. There's no reason why you couldn't start in April, but that's also down to you and your team being on the ball and getting that proposal together as quickly as possible.
Thank you. One of the questions is, for the defined track grants, would the proposer be included in the research team?
For the defined track, I think, yes, they are a partner in the research. They might not get direct funding from from Agile, but we haven't completely bottomed that out. I think that gets bottomed out in this co-creation stage in the new year. But I think if you feel like I really want to know, am I going to have to spend a load of money on that partner, that organization being a paid partner? I think the answer is no, they're not going to be in there as a big paid partner, but there is a strong expectation that they make a big commitment to the project and they may get some funding. So it's a slightly kind of yes and no. They're involved heavily, but they're not going to be a big paid partner. We're not going to suddenly spend a load of NERC money funding Google to be part of this topic of like that. I don't think that would make sense, but they are a key partner in the project. I hope that gets at the answer that person was after.
Sorry, Heather, I see you're replying to some of them in the chat. Thank you. There are also some networking questions. For those of you looking to find research partners, have a look in the chat. There's a question about the defined track, and do they need to address all 4 questions, for example, or can they just select 2 of the 4 research questions?
Yeah, this is I think that's a tactical decision that I think it comes down to the research team responding to the call, the topics. I think if you're chopping off half the questions and it feels like it means you're not doing a lot of what they were looking at, I think that's a risk. I would encourage you to, as Rachel mentioned, like their email addresses are there. I would encourage you to get in touch with these people. We don't want to overload them, but they have all agreed to give their email addresses and they know people might be reaching out. So I think if you wanted to chop it in half like that, rather than just reframe a question a bit, I would get in touch with them and see what their response is. Because if they come back and say, well, this just isn't the same thing anymore, then that will weigh on our decision. So I think it's not, I wouldn't advise just getting rid of half of it and not acknowledging that. I would get in touch with them, ask them how they feel about that. And if you only want to focus on half, have talked that through with them a bit so that they don't, if they're going to have a very negative reaction.
Thank you. Another question, for the open track, can we submit 2 applications if we have 2 different projects and policy partners?
I think the technical answer is yes, you're allowed to be involved with as many as you want. Is that right, Rachel? Yeah. So you can.
That is correct.
I think the only risk there is it just looks a bit cheeky or crazy somehow if you've got 5 applications with 5 different things, and maybe that might raise a few eyebrows. But no, I think that's fine.
That's also true between the open. Oh, go on.
It would be very, very unlikely to fund the same people to do 2 projects. In fact, I don't see that happening.
Yes.
So the same,
agreed.
more than you could be involved in more than one project as an individual. You could be primarily on one project and have a small amount of time on another project, but we're definitely not going to be sort of fund the same team to do 2 or 3 projects. That's not going to.
Agreed.
And that's true between both tracks as well.
Yes.
Just wanted to add.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I think that also kind of speaks to a wider point, which we maybe haven't mentioned yet, is that what these funding, which sprints to take forward is also a kind of portfolio decision. We have to think about what other proposals we've got, what's gone before. And so sometimes some of the questions really are, well, it depends what's on the table in that set of proposals we get. And I mean, that's normal for any funding call, I think, but it's so, but it's absolutely true. If you submit two things, they're then basically in direct competition. And I think it would be extremely unlikely that we funded two sprints with the same lead or like a very similar team. I think that would be very unlikely to happen.
Thanks, guys. And there's also a question about funding. So, for example, if there's a DPhil student in the team, can we use some of the budget for them?
So
Rachel can correct me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go, Rachel.
Yeah, I'll just answer that. So we cannot fund studentships, so we couldn't fund that any part of that DPhil's students' research work per se. DPhil students have been involved in sprints so far. They've in two different ways. One way is that they've been part of a team, but they've not been funded at all by the sprint. So they've been, because the work that they're doing is very close to the nature of the sprint, and they're doing it as part of their own research work, then they can be involved in the sprint but not funded on it. However, that's a little bit of a blurry line, to be honest, because while we do want to that might make sense depending upon the topic and the nature of the team and things like that. The sprint has to produce its outputs related to its questions in its time frame, not determined by a DPhil student's sort of outputs. They would be considered as a separate piece of work. It's just what they're doing on the sprint. The other way in which DPhil students and other students, frankly, master's students, but also people who've sort of in a gap between finishing an undergraduate or finishing a master's and thinking about doing a PhD, is to be involved as a research assistant, but a DPhil student could also be involved as a temporary research assistant. But it really depends on it has to be within the terms and conditions of the studentship. So you could be involved as a part-time research assistant in some format if the sort of DPhil studentship allowed that to happen, or short-term as like a casual research assistant for a small period of work. It's very much UKRI terms and conditions that we are using.
Yeah, just to re-emphasize that, I think it's a bit of a silly rule, but like that's a UKRI rule that we can't fund PhD students directly. So yeah.
Sorry, there's still quite a few more in the chat to get through. There's a question about the Agile Enablement Fund and if they can apply to engage, convene, and plan the proposal for this call with external partners, hosting an engagement session with that funding.
Oh, that's an interesting one. We haven't been in that situation before because the Enabling Fund is new. I don't see why not, but you haven't got much time. So you've got a month in which to produce your expression of interest. And so if you wanted to get funding from the Enabling Fund, that has to go through a process and decision-making process. So it feels quite tight to me. It's not impossible, though. You can't fund staff costs with the Enabling Fund. It's literally non-staff costs only. So if you wanted to organise an event or a workshop or something like that, Enabling Fund money could be used for that. I mean, we say in the terms and conditions that during the co-creation phase, so if you get through the expression of interest phase and into the co-creation phase, we can support funding for bringing your stakeholders together, having a meeting, that sort of thing. It's the same conditions, though. We can't fund staff time pre-award, but we can support meeting costs, catering costs, that sort of thing. Whether I would do that with general funds or from the Enabling Fund, I don't really know. You might need to send Bob an email about that one.
There's a question about non-traditional outputs. So, for example, would something like a data tool count as an output?
Potentially, yes. I think the thing I always say on outputs is think about what are the outputs that are useful for your policy partner, whether they're public sector, NGO, business. Think about what they want, what are the outputs they need to be able to facilitate the impact that this research might have on a real world problem. So it's what is that? Don't just default to a policy brief because that's what feels obvious. Default to what would be useful to them, and that might be just regular meetings and slide decks and very, very short, kind of maybe not even written, like it's presentations, it's talks, it's things like that are the outputs that they need. In that sense, it's infinitely flexible as long as it's clear that it's something that's useful for you to have that impact on the problem and with the partners that you're working with.
So there's a question about UK interests. So to what extent should the proposal be aligned with UK interests? For example, if the proposal addresses deforestation in sub-Saharan Africa, which benefits the global environment, is this sufficient, or must it specifically link to UK policy?
I think I'm interested to get at both of our perspectives on this. For me, the way I normally answer this question is, because it's NERC funding, NERC always basically say to us, oh, it doesn't have to be UK, but we need to understand why this is relevant or interesting for the UK and why UK taxpayers should be funding this. So I think you need, any problem, if it has an international dimension, has to have some thought about, well, what does this mean for the UK? And the kind of stronger that is and clearer that is in the proposal, the easier it is for us to say, oh, this is totally fine. But I think as researchers, we're not particularly interested in constraining things to like, oh, it has to be about UK policy or UK business. And you see from the sprints we've already funded, they're not all UK only, and some of them are very international and don't have a huge look to the UK. So I think there's wiggle room there, but I think you should always think of, well, have some element of the sprint that thinks about what does this mean for the UK and what's the UK's role in this topic, even if that is then only 5 or 10% of the effort of the sprint. Would you add anything to that, Rachel, or disagree?
I would agree with that. I think the way in which to think about it is that the UK government has got major global commitments and huge international commitments within its policy framework as well. So in what way does the piece of research that you're planning, in what way does the sprint also have relevance for how the UK is fulfilling its international commitments? And you may well find that there is a strong interest, say, within sort of DEFRA's international team or within FCDO. I mean, we would be very interested to, I think we tried to have some conversations early on with FCDO about possible sprints that helped FCDO with its policy as well. So, you know, that having some sort of connection back to UK international commitments would not be a bad idea, I would say. It's not, you know, it's not written hard into the rules, but I think it would also make the sprint more relevant, timely, and of interest to a wider audience within the UK.
We have a question about letters of support at the EOI stage. Are they needed at this point?
Nope, you don't need letters of support at this stage. Letters of support you would have to have for the full proposal, but you know, the more, making it clear within the expression of interest that those partners are genuinely committed and interested is fine, but you don't need to go down the route of having those formal letters.
There's also a question about sort of networking as well, if we have any mechanism to connect spare researchers that want to connect to form a team.
I think at the moment we've talked about this a lot, and I think for this call, my understanding is we don't have that mechanism in place. I think we're very happy to try and facilitate that on a kind of informal basis. I'm not sure if that's ideal, but I mean, I'm personally very happy to be sent emails saying, oh, I'm thinking about this. Do you know anyone who's thinking in that topic as well, on that kind of area as well? That's a bit of a kind of informal ad hoc answer. What do you reckon, Rachel?
We don't have the capacity to organise any formal networking activities at the moment. But if it did turn out that there's 10 of you on this call who are thinking that you would like to be involved in a sprint, but you don't see yourself as a lead on a sprint, and therefore you can't submit an expression of interest saying, I'm very keen to lead a sprint on this topic, and I'd be looking to form a team involving X, potentially researchers from these number of disciplines. So that's one thing that you can do. So you don't have to have a named team. The other option, if we discover that there's a whole load of people, we could potentially just organise for you to come for a coffee in the Oxford Martin School and get to know each other and see if you can form teams in that sort of way. It would be a little bit ad hoc because our capacity is relatively low to organise something like that. But We're certainly keen to facilitate it. And one of the things that we are keen to do is we don't, it is a tricky one, because we want the Agile initiative to present opportunities to researchers who haven't had the opportunity to do this sort of thing before, who might not be part of a organised, very structured research group already, or who are looking to really push the boundaries of interdisciplinary thinking. And you might not know about a researcher in humanities or in law or something like that would be interesting to it. So we'd really love to see new configurations of people coming together. So if that is something that we can help with, then do perhaps write to us, write to the Agile inbox, and we could see what we could try and organise if it turns out that would be something that would be important for this particular call.
We have one question that's recurred. Is the sprint lead allowed to spend more than 20% of their time on the project? Are we comfortable with 100%?
Completely and utterly, yes. Okay, well, I will stop sharing my screen, and I will say thank you very, very much for participation in this call, for your interest in the Agile initiative. We're very excited by this one. We've seen a lot of enthusiasm from lots of researchers in many different departments as well. So we're really hoping that we're going to get some fantastic sprint proposals coming in. If you've got more questions, we will follow up by email with those. Just write to the Agile email address. And we'll wash up anything that we haven't mentioned already, but we can also use the questions that have been asked today to develop some more frequently asked questions. But at any time over the next month, as you're trying to put together your ideas, reach out if you've got any questions, because that's what we're here to try and do to help. A lot of this is new, a lot of it is new for you, some of it's new for us, and it's all a fantastic learning journey. So really enthusiastic to see what comes through. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks all. Thank you, Rachel.